All right. Hello, everybody. I have pressed the button and we're live here. And I have Jeff Iles. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, how are you?
So I'm excellent, and I'm looking forward to having you on. Jeff is a unique guest for me. Jeff was my VP when I was starting teaching, and in fact was one of the people that I bounced this podcast idea off in the early phases, and we've been going back and forth throughout. I've been lots of feedback from him, and we have found some time in his busy schedule, and we've got him in. I'm really excited. Jeff has a neat, interesting view because he's taught all the way from kindergarten through to post-secondary, and has a wide variety of other experiences as well. So here he is, Jeff Iles.
Awesome introduction. That was great.
I'm working on my introductions. That was the feedback I got from you. All right, Jeff. So
Okay.
you know the umbrella. You know what it is we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about innovation. What do you think? What is it?
So I have some possibly controversial ideas on innovation because I don't think innovation happens naturally. I think innovation is something you have to work at. And I also think that there are two things that have to happen when you have innovation. So you can have a brilliant idea and you can be doing great things, but there's a big difference between being innovative and having natural talent. And so in terms of natural talent, I think of someone who has natural talent as someone who does something awesome, does something wonderful, does something incredibly creative, but then when you ask them how they did it, they're just like, oh, I don't know, I just did it naturally.
Right.
And so that's talent. And I think that from an education perspective, we should be seeking out talent, but we'll get to that in just a second. I'm going to get to what innovation is. And so when I talk about innovation, you have these ideas to change something, but in order for it to be innovative, it has to have two different things in my mind. So you have to be able to replicate whatever your innovative idea is in any kind of different shape. You also have to be able to modify it based on the needs that are presented in front of you. And so if you can't do either of those things, then it hasn't been innovation yet.
Okay. So it can't be a shot in the dark, what you're saying. That's a good point, right? Because if you can't replicate it, then you didn't know what you did.
You have to be, in order for it to be truly innovative, you have to be able to be thinking about it it's all about the process, not about the product. And so you have to be thinking about how you're starting, where you're going, and where you hope to go. Because in my mind, innovation is just knowing that you're trying to do something that's going to make you better tomorrow than you are today.
So blind luck is not innovation.
Blind luck is not innovation. Natural talent's not innovation. So if somebody who's naturally talented at something, like when we think about it in terms of, if we step outside of the world of education right now, we step into athletics, and we think about some of the greatest athletes in terms of whatever sport you want to go for, the top athletes are not the ones who are innovative. The people who are innovative are the ones who have subpar skills, but figure out how to make themselves elite. And so you don't get credit for top talent. You get credit for making that jump from a lower level skill set to elite status because you work hard, you figure out technique, you worked on your craft, something like that.
Like the method of success. The method of success rather than the fact of success is more important. So when you said sports, now I'm thinking of Muhammad Ali, right? So he got a bunch of success from just being this wonderfully talented, really athletic guy. As he got older, that went away, and he developed that rope-a-dope, right? That solved that big problem for him, and that would be innovation. But like just his rise to success, maybe that's not innovation because he's just using techniques that exist and really good at it.
Oh yeah. And I think that you have to have some self-analysis in order for innovation to happen. And so someone can take their natural talent and turn it into innovation if they take that self-analysis piece. Some people aren't interested in doing the self-analysis. They're just interested in doing their thing and doing it well. And that's good too. There's nothing wrong with that.
But it's tough in a teaching world. Right, because if you're a really talented teacher and you do a really good job, you don't know how you're doing it, then you can't pass that on to anybody else, and it doesn't enrich your community at all.
Well, I would argue that it did enrich the community because you taught the students that you taught, and maybe you were not innovative, but they may be innovative, and they may take the things that they learned from you and develop innovation. So you can be the seed without actually And so when I guess like when we get to these bigger questions of like why education's not working, or if it is working, education is working. It's just that our benchmarks for success have expanded to be much more inclusive on an economic level, much more inclusive on an achievement level, much more inclusive from an assessment level. And so, but then because we are more inclusive, we start to find that there are more problems. That one way doesn't solve the issue. And so my issue with education is we're constantly talking about innovation, but we're not talking about top tier talent. We're letting top tier talent go to other industries. And we're coming back to the derogatory statement about teaching was, if you can't do, then you end up teaching. And then the derogatory statement for administrators, if you can't teach, you end up administrating.
Ouch. Yeah, no, fair enough. And so what do you see as being the piece or pieces missing for that? Just acknowledging it and seeing talent as something that's important?
I think that recognizing,
I don't think you hear that word often about that's a talented teacher, right?
Yeah, well, what I also don't think, I feel like we hear about innovative teachers, but I don't think we hear about teachers working on their craft. And I think that we need to think of teachers teaching as a craftsmanship more than as a skill. So we are trying to be, there's a whole bunch of student-centered conversations going on. We have to be student-centered. We have to think about the students, the student outcomes, all those types of things. But
well, you and I are probably thinking about an example of a teacher who really doesn't want us to use his name, so we won't. But we both worked with this teacher who didn't realize he was really good at getting students on board, but was amazing at it.
Yeah, he was great at it, and great at it in a variety of different ways for a variety of different students. It wasn't just one type of student that he would get to latch on to the thing. He would get. I think that we need to start recognizing talent, and we need to start craftsmanship and working on your craft, and not working on innovation, doing the best and the brightest, working on what you're good at and maximizing what you're good at and turning that into a skill set that's valued. And so when I think of when we talk about, so I live in this world of exceptionalities, and I think that this whole idea of being exceptional is a loaded term. But if we take it away from education, if I talk about somebody who's exceptional, that means they're pretty good at it. And I think that we need to get back to that idea of exceptional, focusing on what someone is pretty good and championing what they are good at and supporting what they need support for. And there's no reason why that has to only happen in a special education world or in an education world in general. It should be happening top to bottom.
Yeah, well, and you gave a chat. Oh man, was it 2 years ago now that you talked at local college about today's accommodation, or yesterday's accommodations are tomorrow's best practices?
Yeah. So today's today's best practices or today's accommodations are tomorrow's best practices.
Yeah, and so that's interesting to play that to. I like how that plays to everybody, right? Because we can say it to students. Okay, so it used to be that getting a computer was an accommodation. Now it's a best practice. Everyone's using it. Same with Dragon, et cetera, et cetera. But it kind of plays right across society and therefore teachers as well, right?
Yeah, and if we bring this back to innovation, so the innovation is throwing something at the wall, under the wall, and see if it works. And that's what an accommodation is. So an accommodation, a student comes forward and they're, for whatever reason, they can't learn in whatever the quote unquote traditional classroom is. And so when you have a non-traditional, so then traditional attempt, and so that's what the accommodation is. All of a sudden that accommodation works really well for that student, and then you start seeing the application of that accommodation to more and more students, and you start broadening the portfolio of what type of student could use it. And the next thing you know, it becomes part of the universal design. It becomes part of the standard. And so having non-traditional assessments as an example is one of those types of things. Having computers in the classroom. Within Ontario, it's only been 14 years where from 14 years ago, you had to fight the school board to get a computer into the classroom for your child to be able to use it. And now it is almost mandatory that this child has to have a computer in the classroom. So we are only in a 14-year world. So there are students who are in pre-K now, who are graduating, who started their education path with computers not being allowed to be in the classroom.
Wow, that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so we're not even in one generation.
And now it's a standard, and it's expected to go right across the board. My favorite example you gave in that talk was the curb cutaways. I like that because it was so non-technical, right?
Well, and so there's within education, it's the curb cut model. And so the curb cut model is when you're walking on the sidewalk and you see curb cuts, and curb cuts were as a legal mandate, were meant so that wheelchairs could have access to every sidewalk. And you cannot build any kind of facility without having wheelchair access. And so within sidewalks, they're called curb cuts. But in reality, what people came to realize is that it was not just wheelchairs accessing curb cuts. It was predominantly parents with strollers, delivery people with carts, those types of things. Anything that needed wheels, that needed to get up on a sidewalk and over that curb, was using the curb cut. And so if we start thinking about, so we may go with the legal reason for a disability related reason as to why to start something, but all of a sudden we'll start to realize that those tools are much more varied than what originally was meant for. If we look at to put it into like a technology perspective, Dragon Naturally Speaking and Google Talk and anything where you talk into a microphone and it types it out for you, that was originally perfected by members of the disability community. However, right, what's interesting about those companies is they never meant it to be a disability only product. And they had the long range vision that eventually everyone would be using this. And that is, we are getting very close to that type of technology.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I use Read and Write all the time. Love it. Fantastic.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, the concept of audiobooks, and you can have your own audiobook without having to purchase it just by pressing the button on your smartphone. That is a useful tool for me to wash dishes and get some reading done, as an example. Freeing up my hands, but my mind is still ready to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. So then this idea of playing the strengths is kind of a classic thing in the world of spec ed or world of exceptionalities, of you figure out what the student's strength is, support that strength, and then buffer up the weaknesses. Well, what you're saying is we don't apply that to teachers. Is that right?
We should be using it towards teachers. We should be trying to figure out what teachers are good at and trying to maximize the teaching talent that we have, as opposed to just putting teachers into a classroom and saying, we have classes in grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 and grade 4 and grade 5. And then you figure out what you're good at and maximize your students. And if that's the case, sometimes that works and that's great, but we also have to allow people who want to be teachers. We want to recruit people because they're talented. And I think that's a real weakness in education. Everyone's been involved with a teacher. Everyone's had access to a teacher. But when you recruit people who want to be teachers. And I think that we need to start thinking about that slightly differently. And we want to recruit people who want to, yes, they want to teach, they want to help, they want to do something. But we also want to find people who may not see themselves as just having a talent.
Well, that's kind of neat. I mean, the idea of recruiting teachers, right? Like, are they actively recruited? And like right now in Ontario, we're right in the middle of a shift. We've just gone from a 1-year program to a 2-year program at Teachers College. Like, things are changing right now.
Yeah, and I think that we need to think about who comes into Teachers College, and it's not just about having that interest and having that foundation of lesson planning, because there are people who are excellent lesson planners who are excellent at writing all of the paperwork, and that should be valued in a school. But they can't get up in front of a classroom because they can't do that classroom management piece. There are people who are going to manage a room in an incredible way, but then all of a sudden you have to start putting in the standards and knowing how you got there. They just don't know how that happens. They just do, it all comes naturally. So we have to let people's natural talents sort themselves out.
Well, and here's, I mean, I'll take a controversial leap, maybe just as a question of, you certainly hear amongst teachers college students, well, I want to get into education because I want the best for students. And that's a great sort of ideology as far as how you want to support people, and that's lovely. But what I think you're saying, and maybe I'm taking a wrong leap, is what about selecting those teachers college applicants because they provide the best for students rather than because they want to?
But yeah, well, and I don't want you to come into education because you want the best for students. If you want the best for students, there's a million other ways you can do that. I want you to come into the education because you want to be the best teacher you can be. And the student is, in my mind, from a training teacher's perspective, the student is almost irrelevant because you're only going to have that student for 1 year, but you're going to be a teacher for 30. And so I really want to, and this, I'm sure that this is not the viewpoint. I want to take the students out of the idea, and I want to focus on maximizing your craft and using each group of students as a way of making you a much better teacher.
Yeah, well, and I can see how I mean, certainly it's controversial, but it's an interesting thing, because if you're being the best possible teacher that you can, and part of that will be adaptability, and
Yes.
if that's what you're doing, then you're going to be able to meet the needs of all these other students, right?
Yeah, well, and you'll be able to master the assessments. You'll be able to read where they're at. You'll be able to understand, because part of teaching is assessing and making sure that you're teaching, and depending on if you're public versus private, wherever your benchmarks you need to hit, that's all part of teaching. But none of that has to do with a specific student in mind. Like, you have to teach the students who are in front of you, regardless of who they are. You have the students that you have, and then next year you'll have a different group, or 2 years from now, if you're in a looping program. Teach the students that you have, not the students that you idealize,
Right.
as terms of what you want.
Yeah, that's a neat way to go about it, because I mean, we've seen the quote, I believe it's standing behind you, or near you anyway, in your office, right? Teach the students that you had, up the students that you want. But I think that could be interpreted as, okay, I need to think about how I'm going to accommodate this one individual student, or these set of students that are different. But what you're saying is, well, think about how you can be the best possible teacher, and that will be more effective as far as dealing with the challenges.
Yeah, because if one of the challenges is that I don't know how to reach the student because the student has a variety of exceptionalities that I'm not familiar with. Part of being a good teacher is reaching out for support and trying to find that support. And so that's what you would do. And that shouldn't be seen as a weakness because I'm not the best teacher. The best teacher doesn't mean that they know how to do everything. The best teacher simply means that they know how to, if they run into a roadblock, where to go once they hit that roadblock to get some sort of support, whether it's their professional community, whether it's the people within their school, whether it's just friends and family who have some sort of experience with a student like that. But constantly seeking out and having those conversations is part of being the best teacher you can be. And it's in that student in front of you. Yes, they're the student that you're teaching, but you're also, everything that any student gives you should be making you a better teacher.
Yeah, well, and that kind of touches on when you first spoke, you said, in the world of innovation, there's two components, replicate and modify, and that kind of speaks to modify.
Right. And so you have to, if you are not able to modify your innovation, then it's not innovative, because it's a steel box that can't be changed.
It's a solution, right? You've solved
Yes.
one problem, but then if it's not able to adapt and modify to a different similar problem, then it's not innovative.
Yeah. It's an interesting concept. It's because it has to be fluid.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I like that you're linking back this idea of reflection. I think that kind of plays huge, right? Is how did that work? How did that not work? And then how can I continue this process, this fluid process, as it moves forward?
Yeah. Well, and also, and reflection ties in with failure. And I think that we get caught up within teaching because we taught in a world of pass fail. I'm sorry, we grew up in a world of pass fail where you were learning and either you passed the class or you didn't pass the class. And then you bring that to teaching, and you have to stop. My opinion is you can't put the pass fail logic onto your own teaching. It has to be whether it worked or didn't work, and then what can I do to learn from this situation? Because you're no longer passing or failing anymore. You have graduated from school. You are now on the other side of the chair.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, that makes sense. And I've been talking a bit about like embracing failure, and have you seen failure resumes?
Oh yeah. It's great. I think as a way of building your resume, it's a great way, just in terms of stepping away. And in terms of building a resume, it's a great way of identifying what you've done, because if you build a failure resume, then you put everything that you failed down. All of a sudden, it's a lot easier to see what your successes were, because you've now just separated things out. And that's
It shines a light on them, right?
Yeah. It shines the light right on them.
There's this graphic that I saw, which I'll try to explain in words, which probably makes no sense at all to do, but I'll do it anyway, where it took composers and then graphed them on one axis being greatness and the other being volume of compositions. How exactly they define greatness is an excellent question, but let's just say they found a really good way to do that.
Okay.
And those who scored higher on the greatness scale also scored higher on the composition scale. So they were having a really high volume of compositions, and therefore they were getting greatness based to this, or excellent greatness based on this scale. So that kind of, if you extrapolate that a bit, it's saying, well, they don't have, there's thousands of compositions, so they don't have thousands of hits.
Right.
But so therefore they have thousands of failures. But because they've had a chance to go out and do those thousands of failures, they're getting these great successes. And those who aren't willing to go out and have all these failed experiments don't have the great successes.
Oh yeah. I mean, every innovator, every inventor, every entrepreneur says the same thing, that you have to fail in order to have your success. And every failure is an opportunity, and every chance that you didn't take because you were afraid of failure is just a missed opportunity to learn.
Right. Okay, Jeff. So we're coming close to the end here. What stuff haven't I touched yet that you want to talk about? Anything in particular?
Well, in terms of, if we get right back to innovation, so you have to have a criteria for what innovation is, and so I have this. There's a guy who's an assistive technologist who has built this five finger method of evaluating any type of technology to see whether or not it has value. And I think that it doesn't have to be technology. It works with pretty much anything. And so when you're evaluating any kind of innovation, it has to work for you as an individual, like you as the person who's going to be doing it. So someone else may have a great idea, but if that great idea doesn't apply to you, then it's useless. A second thing is that it has to be accessible, and it has to be affordable. And so there can be some innovation that if you had unlimited resources, there would be no question. But if it's not accessible and it's not affordable, then again, that doesn't work out. And right. the third thing for me is that it has to be understandable, easily inputted. There can't be a there can't be a roadblock in terms of getting it in place.
Like the learning curve can't be really steep, you mean?
Learning curve can't be really steep, or there can't be too many steps for me to put it in place, or else it's not innovative, because then the next innovation would be streamlining that steps to put it in place.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, that's a nice criteria. I like that. It makes it easier to start to evaluate things a bit.
Yeah, I guess that's really my whole thing, is that evaluation of everything is the whole point. Like, you can have great ideas, but great ideas must be implemented, and they must be evaluated.
Awesome. All right, Jeff. Well, thanks for making the time to come out and have a chat.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, bye-bye.